Your hands off that child. Where are you taking her to?
Officer, this is my daughter. What's going on?
Look at your skin. She doesn't even look like you. Where are her real parents? It's obvious you stole her from them.
I can show you my ID, officer. You can make calls to confirm this.
Sure. The ID's probably fake too. Hands where I can see them.
Saturday afternoon, 2:47 p.m., Ocean Vista Beach, California. A white police officer forced a black mother face down into the sand while her 8-year-old blonde daughter screamed, reaching for her with tears streaming down her face. Beachgoers surrounded them, phones out, filming everything, shouting objections. The officer's body cam captured every second. What happened next would cost the city $2.8 million and destroy a 15-year career forever. But here's what Officer Sean Terry didn't know at that moment. The little girl crying wasn't kidnapped. She wasn't in danger, and the woman he had pinned in the sand with his knee crushing her back. Officer Terry had no idea who Annika Sloan actually was. Within 72 hours, that ignorance would detonate across every major news network in America. Within 1 hour of this incident, the mayor's office received 47 phone calls. The FBI Civil Rights Division opened an official file. The Department of Justice launched a preliminary review, and a 15-year police career was about to collapse under the weight of just 8 minutes of body cam footage that would be watched by over 20 million people. Before we go any further, comment what state you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because the way this story ends will leave you absolutely speechless. Sean Terry was 40 years old and had been wearing a badge for 15 years. He was a decorated officer, a patrol supervisor at Ocean Vista Beach jurisdiction, and among the younger officers, he was known as old school. But what that really meant was this: aggressive, quick to escalate situations, and dismissive of complaints. Terry had 3 official commendations for what the department called proactive policing. What the department didn't advertise was the disturbing pattern that lived beneath those medals. Over 8 years, 11 formal complaints had been filed against Sean Terry. 8 of those complaints involved Black or Latino individuals. The charges ranged from excessive force to racial profiling to simple discourtesy. 4 families had quietly settled out of court rather than fight the system. 1 teenager still carried scars from a traffic stop that went horribly wrong. And every single time, Internal Affairs cleared Officer Terry. Insufficient evidence became the departmental refrain, repeated so often it lost all meaning. Fellow officers whispered among themselves that Terry had a problem with certain people, but no one ever said it officially. No one ever put it in writing. That Saturday afternoon, Terry sat in his patrol car surveying Ocean Vista Beach. It was packed with families, colorful umbrellas, volleyball games in full swing. 87 degrees, a perfect California summer day. But Terry was watching the crowd with the intensity of a predator. His gaze moved across the beach until it stopped on one woman in particular. A black woman, athletic build, wearing designer sunglasses, walking hand in hand with a white, blonde child. Terry's jaw tightened. He stepped out of his vehicle and started walking toward them. The woman Terry was fixating on was Annika Sloan, 38 years old, a software architect at a major tech firm. She was walking across the sand hand in hand with her daughter Leah, both of them smiling. Annika's faded Stanford alumni t-shirt had seen years of weekend beach trips just like this one. Her athletic build came from disciplined morning runs, and her face lit up with a warm smile whenever Leah pointed excitedly at seagulls overhead. For the last 6 months, Annika had been rotating between brutal 60-hour work weeks, attending Leah's soccer games, and grief counseling sessions. She was still adjusting to the weight of single motherhood after her wife Della's cancer diagnosis forced her to reduce her hours at work. But Leah never saw her mother's exhaustion. She only saw her complete devotion. They'd come to the beach that day to celebrate Leah finishing 2nd grade. It was their tradition. Beach day, ice cream, and then dinner at her favorite restaurant. Annika had left work early, which was rare during a project deadline week, but she'd made a promise. She'd chosen Ocean Vista Beach specifically because it was less crowded than the popular spots. She wanted quality time with her daughter without the chaos. Leah had been talking about this day for 2 straight weeks, counting down the hours. Annika had promised her that nothing would ruin it. What most people didn't know about the Sloan family was this. Annika and Della had adopted Leah when she was just 11 months old. It had been an open adoption arranged through Della's social work connections. Leah's biological mother was a teenager who wanted her daughter to have the stability she couldn't provide. Annika carried a photo in her wallet from adoption day, all 3 of them with tears streaming down their faces, crying happy tears. Leah called both Annika and Della her real parents, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. She had Annika's infectious laugh and Della's stubborn determination. Inside their home, race had never mattered. It was simply never a factor in how they loved each other. But outside their home, the world was different. Annika had prepared herself for the questions people sometimes asked about her blonde daughter. She just wasn't prepared for them today. Not like this. Annika was kneeling in the sand, helping Leah build an elaborate sandcastle, when a shadow fell across them both. Officer Sean Terry approached without introduction, without a smile, without any friendly tone. One hand rested on his belt near his weapon, as he informed Annika he needed to ask questions about the child. Terry demanded to know Annika's relationship to the girl. Annika stood up, brushing sand off her hands, offering a confused but polite smile, as she explained this was her daughter Leah, and asked if something was wrong. Terry's response was cold and precise, clarifying that he hadn't asked what Annika called her, but what her relationship was. Leah looked up from her sandcastle, sensing the tension in her mother's voice. Annika tried to stay calm, explaining she was her mother and they were just having a beach day, asking if there was a problem. Terry's next words were delivered as pure command, with no explanation offered, ordering Annika to stay right there and not move. No courtesy, just authority asserted through intimidation. Then came the accusation. Terry claimed they'd received a report of a woman matching Annika's description bothering children. Annika felt her stomach drop, explaining she'd been there with her daughter for 20 minutes and hadn't talked to anyone else. Terry's response dripped with suspicion, suggesting that's what someone doing something wrong would say. Leah's small voice broke through, asking what was happening. Annika kept her voice steady for her sake, assuring her it was just a misunderstanding. But Terry wasn't interested in reassurance, ordering Annika not to talk to her and stating he needed to verify who she was. A woman sitting nearby on a beach towel spoke up, informing the officer they'd been playing together the whole time, and there was no problem. Terry ignored her completely, as if she hadn't spoken at all. Terry began circling them slowly, his eyes analyzing every detail. Under his breath, barely audible but picked up clearly by his Bodycam microphone, Terry muttered that her designer everything was probably stolen. Annika heard it. Every word. Her face went carefully neutral, an expression she'd learned as a black woman navigating corporate America. Don't react. Don't give them ammunition. Don't prove their assumptions right. Leah looked up at her mother with confusion and fear, asking why the officer was being mean. Annika's voice was gentle as she told her to be quiet and let her handle it. Terry cut through the moment, asking if Annika had ID. Annika nodded immediately, explaining it was in her bag 10 feet away and asking if she could retrieve it. Terry interrupted, stating Annika would move when told to move. Finally, Terry gave a curt nod. Annika walked slowly to their beach bag, narrating every single movement, explaining she was reaching for her wallet in the front pocket. She pulled out her driver's license and handed it over with steady hands. Terry barely glanced at it, Annika tried reasoning, pointing out the matching last names of Leah Sloan and Annika Sloan, offering to show photos and adoption papers. Terry cut her off, claiming lots of people use fake IDs and claim kids that aren't theirs. Annika felt her pulse spike, adrenaline flooding her system. She explained she was complying with everything being asked, that her wife was a social worker who could bring Leah's adoption papers, birth certificate, everything needed. Terry's voice went hard, telling Annika not to instruct him on what to do, that he would determine what happened. A man nearby who'd been filming on his phone called out that this was crazy, that she'd shown her ID. Terry turned toward him with a threat, ordering him to put the phone down or be next. What happened next would change everything. Terry grabbed Annika's wrist hard, ordering her to turn around and put her hands behind her back. Annika's voice rose in disbelief, asking why after she'd shown her ID. Terry twisted her arm, forcing compliance. Annika gasped from the sudden pain, but didn't resist, telling the officer she wasn't resisting and pleading with him to remember her daughter was right there. Leah screamed, her 8-year-old voice cutting through the beach noise, yelling at him to stop hurting her mommy. She ran toward them, but Terry pushed her back with his free hand, ordering her to stay away. Leah stumbled backward into the sand, Annie terrified. Terry shouted that Annika needed to stop resisting. Annika's voice was strained but clear as she insisted she wasn't resisting and was standing still. The body cam showed everything. Annika's hands moving into position behind her back. No resistance, no aggression, full compliance. Terry yanked harder anyway. Then Terry swept Annika's legs out from under her. The momentum carried both of them forward. Annika's chest hit the sand first, then her face, then her shoulder, twisted at an unnatural angle. The impact forced all the air from her lungs in a sound somewhere between a gasp and a shout. Leah's scream cut through every other sound on that beach. 30 people stopped what they were doing and stared. Phones came out from every direction. Terry dropped his knee into Annika's back, pinning her down. Annika couldn't breathe properly. The sand filling her mouth, the weight crushing her ribs. Leah threw herself at Terry, her small fists hitting his arm uselessly, screaming at him to get off her mommy. Terry shoved her away again, harder this time. She fell backward, sobbing so hard she started gagging. Annika, her voice muffled by sand, tried to calm her terrified daughter, telling her it was okay and not to fight. Even while being brutalized, she was trying to protect her. Terry cuffed her, the metal biting into Annika's wrists, too tight, intentionally painful. Annika told the officer the cuffs were too tight, that she had full compliance, and asked him to please adjust them. Terry's response was dismissive, saying Annika would survive. He yanked Annika up by the cuffs, wrenching her injured shoulder. Annika bit back a cry of pain. Leah was hysterical now, crying out for her mommy, trying to reach her. Terry ordered her to stay back, or she'd be next. Leah collapsed in the sand 15 feet away, sobbing, reaching desperately for her mother. Annika's heart shattered watching her daughter's trauma unfold, powerless to comfort her. The witnesses weren't staying silent anymore. A black woman in her 50s spoke up firmly, stating she'd been there for an hour, and that woman had done nothing but play with her daughter. Terry barked at her to step back. The woman who'd been filming earlier raised her voice, declaring this was racial profiling and everyone could see it. A white couple with their own children added their voices, saying they had kids, and this was insane, that she was clearly her mother. Terry raised his voice to a threatening level, ordering everyone to back up or he'd start making arrests for interference. At least 8 phones were recording now. Someone was live streaming on Instagram. Someone else was on the phone with 911, reporting police misconduct. The crowd was growing, murmuring, the anger building. Terry keyed his radio, reporting to dispatch that he detained a subject matching the description from an earlier call about a possible kidnapping in progress, claiming the subject was combative. Annika protested immediately, insisting she wasn't combative and hadn't resisted once. Terry continued into his radio, describing the suspect as argumentative and agitated, then into his shoulder microphone, quiet, but caught perfectly by his body cam. Terry muttered that these people always have an explanation and always have the right answers ready. And in that moment, Annika understood the trap she was in. No matter what she said, no matter how she complied, Terry had already decided her guilt. Her credentials didn't matter. Her ID didn't matter. Leah screaming for her mommy didn't matter. Only one thing had mattered to Officer Sean Terry from the very first second he saw them together. A white woman in business casual clothing pushed through the crowd. Della Sloan, Annika's wife, still wearing her social work office clothes. She'd gotten a frantic phone call from a witness. Her face showed pure terror mixed with fury as she demanded to know what was going on, declaring that was her wife and her daughter. Terry tried to control the situation, telling her to stay back. Della wasn't having it, announcing she was a licensed clinical social worker and that was her family. Her bag was already open, files in hand, ready for this fight. Behind her came Sergeant Wolf, a 20-year veteran, arriving on a separate call about the disturbance. The beach fell silent, except for Leah's continued sobbing. Wolf took in the entire scene: a black woman in handcuffs, a hysterical blonde child, a crowd of angry witnesses, phones recording from every angle. His expression changed as he processed what he was seeing. He asked Terry what the situation was. If you're feeling the weight of this injustice, don't just watch in silence. Hit that like button and share this story so others can see what really happened. Drop a comment. Have you ever witnessed something like this? Let's keep this conversation going. Sergeant Wolf's first question cut through the tension like a knife, asking why the woman was in cuffs. Terry answered quickly and confidently, explaining they'd gotten a call about a possible kidnapping and the subject matched the description. Wolf's response was immediate and skeptical, asking what description since he'd heard the dispatch and there was no description given. Terry hesitated for the first time, his certainty cracking as he mentioned general suspicious activity. Wolf looked at Leah, still sobbing, then back at Terry, questioning whether this was about a woman with her own daughter. Della stepped forward, her social worker training kicking in. She knew exactly what was needed. She introduced herself as Della Sloan, identified Annika as her wife, and Leah as their daughter, and announced she had documentation. She laid it out like evidence in a courtroom. Adoption certificate, family court documents, Leah's birth certificate with both their names clearly printed, school enrollment papers. Wolf examined each document carefully, methodically. Everything was legitimate. Everything was official. Everything proved that Officer Terry had just brutalized an innocent mother in front of her traumatized child based on nothing but assumptions. Wolf looked up at Annika, still handcuffed, sand coating her hair and face, asking if the address on the documents was current. Annika's voice was strained but clear as she confirmed it was 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. Wolf pulled out the driver's license that Terry had barely glanced at. Perfect match. Every detail correct. Wolf continued his verification, asking if Leah was Annika's adopted daughter. Annika nodded, explaining she had been since she was 11 months old, 8 years ago. The Wolf walked over to where Leah sat with a witness comforting her, her face streaked with tears. He knelt down to her eye level and gently asked if this was her mommy. Through her tears, Leah's voice rang out clearly, saying yes and asking why they hurt her. Wolf's jaw tightened visibly. He stood up and looked directly at the body cam mounted on Terry's chest, recording every single second of this disaster. Wolf turned back to Terry, his voice harder now, asking if the officer had claimed Annika was combative. Terry started to respond, saying Annika had been resistant. The woman who'd been filming on her phone interrupted, her voice loud and angry, calling it a lie and stating she'd recorded the whole thing and Annika had never resisted once. Multiple voices from the crowd joined in, confirming they'd all seen it, that Annika had done everything asked, that it was all on video. Wolf raised his hand for quiet, then addressed Annika directly, asking if she had resisted arrest. Annika's answer was exhausted but precise, stating she'd complied with every command, shown her ID, explained Leah was her daughter, and hadn't moved except when told to, adding that Wolf could check every phone there. Della added her voice, controlled fury beneath every word, pointing out they could also check the bruises they'd see when the cuffs came off. Wolf looked at Terry. Terry looked down at the sand, unable to meet his supervisor's eyes. Then Annika said something that changed the entire trajectory of what was about to happen. Her voice was steady, but carried a deadly weight as she told the sergeant she needed him to know something. There had been a white man with 2 Asian children at the north end of the beach. Annika had seen Officer Terry walk right past them without stopping, questioning, or asking for ID. Silence fell across the beach. Annika continued, each word landing like a hammer, stating the only difference between her and that man was the color of her skin. Wolf's expression went hard as stone. That statement hung in the air. On Bodycam, in front of 40 witnesses, phones recording from every angle. Undeniable. Terry tried to defend himself, claiming that wasn't the case, and he'd been responding to a call. Annika cut him off, declaring Terry had decided she was guilty the second he saw her, before she'd said a word. Wolf's next command was sharp and non-negotiable, ordering Terry to remove the cuffs immediately. Terry made one last attempt, saying he still needed to verify the information. Wolf's voice rose as he stated it was an order. Terry unlocked the handcuffs. As they came off, everyone could see Annika's wrists, deep red marks already turning purple, swelling visible. Della immediately pulled out her phone and photographed the injuries. The moment Annika was free, Leah ran to her. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her daughter in her arms. Both of them were shaking. Annika told her she was okay. Leah's voice was small and broken as she said she'd thought they were taking her away forever. Witnesses around them were wiping tears from their own eyes. The phones were still recording. This moment, this reunion between a mother and her daughter after a brutal injustice, would hit 20 million views by Monday morning. Annika stood up, Leah clinging to her like she'd never let go. Her voice was formal now, deliberate, as she stated she wanted a formal complaint filed, medical documentation of her injuries, badge number, and everything on record. Wolf nodded, confirming Annika would have all of that, and stating he was calling for a supervisor and paramedics. Della wasn't finished, announcing they were also documenting their daughter's psychological trauma, emphasizing she was 8 years old and had just watched police brutalize her mother for no reason. Terry tried one more time, claiming it had been a legitimate response. Annika finally lost her composure, her voice rising as she demanded to know how it was legitimate when Terry had thrown her in the sand in front of her child because he couldn't believe a black woman could be her mother. The crowd erupted in agreement, their voices overlapping in support. Terry went visibly pale. Wolf's final command was ice cold, ordering Terry back to his vehicle and not to leave the scene. Wolf pulled out his radio, requesting Lieutenant Dino at Ocean Vista Beach immediately for a significant civil rights incident with multiple witnesses and video evidence. There was a pause on the other end before Dino asked for clarification on what constituted a civil rights incident. Wolf glanced at Terry, who was walking away toward his patrol car, and explained that an officer had detained and used force on a civilian with her legally adopted daughter based on racial assumptions, that there was full body cam footage, over 40 witnesses, and it was already going viral on social media. The pause was longer this time. Lieutenant Dino's voice came back tight and controlled, and stating he was en route and to secure all evidence with no one leaving. Within 20 minutes, phones started lighting up across California. The mayor's office received 47 calls demanding answers. The ACLU was already drafting a public statement. The local NAACP chapter called an emergency meeting. The FBI Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary file. The Department of Justice flagged the case for review. By the time paramedics arrived to examine Annika's injured shoulder, the incident already had 5 parallel investigations running simultaneously. Internal Affairs, the City Attorney's Office, FBI Civil Rights Division, California Department of Justice, and an independent civilian review board. National news outlets picked up the story by 6 p.m. that evening. By 8 p.m., the hashtag Justice for Annika was trending nationwide. Sunday morning, Sean Terry sat in his living room. His phone was buzzing non-stop with reporters requesting comment. He'd turned off the ringer but could see the notifications piling up. CNN was playing the body cam footage on a continuous loop. His face was clearly visible. His voice was crystal clear, saying there was no way that was Annika's kid. Leah's screams provided the soundtrack in the background. His wife stood in the doorway, staring at him with an expression he'd never seen before, asking what he'd done. He had no answer for her. His union representative had already called him the night before with a grim assessment, stating this one was bad, real bad, and that video doesn't lie. For the first time in 15 years, doubt crept into Sean Terry's mind. Had he just destroyed his entire career over 8 minutes of assumptions? The federal investigators didn't waste any time. Monday morning, Ocean Vista Police Department was flooded with subpoenas. They pulled everything. Every body cam file from Terry covering the last 3 years. Every complaint ever filed against him. Every use of force report he'd submitted. Every arrest record with racial demographics attached. His personnel file. Training records. The dispatch recordings from Saturday afternoon. The patterns that emerged were absolutely damning. Terry's arrest statistics showed that 78% of his arrests were people of color in a jurisdiction where the minority population was only 45%. 11 formal complaints, 8 of them involving clear racial dynamics. Then investigators found something crucial. They looked for the kidnapping call that Terry had referenced on his radio. For the call that supposedly started this entire incident. There was no call. It didn't exist. Sean Terry had lied on dispatch. Tuesday afternoon, the police chief stood before a room full of cameras and reporters. His statement was carefully worded, acknowledging that after reviewing body cam footage and witness statements, it was clear Ms. Annika Sloan and her daughter had been subjected to an unwarranted detention based on bias rather than evidence, and that the department would fully cooperate with federal investigators to ensure complete accountability. But behind closed doors, away from the cameras, the language was much harsher. The city attorney addressed department heads with brutal honesty, pointing out the case had everything they absolutely couldn't defend. Clear video evidence, a sympathetic victim, a traumatized child, obvious racial profiling, and a cop with a documented history. They needed to settle fast or go to court, lose, and pay triple damages. The math was simple: cut their losses now or face complete destruction later. 2 weeks after the incident, Annika Sloan gave her official statement to FBI investigators. She was calm, precise, and absolutely devastating. She explained that she'd made herself smaller that day, that she'd explained every movement before making it, used respectful language, kept her hands visible at all times, and did everything they teach black people to do to survive police encounters. And it still didn't matter. She paused, then continued, stating Officer Terry had decided she was a criminal before she'd spoken a single word, because in his mind, a black woman with a white daughter could only mean one thing. Her voice carried the weight of accumulated pain as she shared that her daughter had asked her that night if the police were going to take her away, emphasizing she was 8 years old and shouldn't have to fear that. The FBI interviewer asked her directly what she wanted to happen. Annika's answer was simple and profound. She wanted her daughter to feel safe again, and she wanted to make sure no other mother had to explain to her child why being black made her a suspect. The Internal Affairs report ran 47 pages. Its findings were unambiguous. Annika Sloan was lawfully present at a public beach. No legal basis for detention existed. No call reporting a kidnapping was ever made to dispatch. Terry's statements to dispatch and on scene contained multiple false claims. The use of force was both unjustified and excessive. And Terry's language, captured on Bodycam, showed clear racial bias. Officer Terry was immediately suspended without pay. His badge was surrendered. His service weapon was surrendered. A termination hearing was scheduled. The outcome, when it was finally announced, was comprehensive. Sean Terry was terminated after a 15-year career. The charges against him included filing a false police report by claiming a kidnapping call that never existed, unlawful detention without probable cause, excessive use of force on a fully compliant civilian, demonstrating racial bias while acting in official capacity, and violation of civil rights under color of law. His post-certification was permanently revoked. He was barred from working in law enforcement anywhere in California. He had no pension eligibility because his termination was for cause. The criminal charges were seriously considered, though ultimately declined, but the investigation itself became part of his permanent record. His name was now permanently attached to federal civil rights case files that would follow him forever. The accountability didn't stop with Terry. The police chief was forced into early retirement. 2 supervisors who had previously dismissed complaints against Terry were demoted. Ocean Vista Police Department entered into a federal consent decree that required sweeping changes. Mandatory bias training on a quarterly basis instead of annual. Bodycam review of all detentions involving children, a civilian oversight board with subpoena power, and an early warning system to flag officers with emerging complaint patterns. The Sloan family filed a federal civil rights lawsuit citing violation of the Fourth Amendment, assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The evidence was overwhelming. The Bodycam footage, the witness testimony, the false dispatch call. The city's attorneys took one look at the case and knew they couldn't win. The city settled before trial for $2.8 million, $800,000 in compensatory damages, $2 million in punitive damages designed to send a message. But more important than the money was what else the settlement included: a public admission of wrongdoing and a formal apology from the city to the Sloan family. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share this video so others can see what happened and why it matters. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, have you or someone you know experienced profiling?